This is really a distillation of the project we did with the campaign that Anna, myself and a colleague, Hannah Swift, were involved with. I really just want to draw your attention to the top issue that we identified, and that loneliness is by definition a solitary and subjective experience. And I think we should hang on to that notion as we think about services and research. It's a painful feeling of an absence of a loss of intimacy. That's what people spoke about. And of attachment and connectedness to someone else, or a place, or a routine. And it undermines people's sense of belonging, security, and selfhood. If I could go on to the next one. Thanks. Okay, so in terms of where that led us, in terms of identifying top priorities, for policy and practice, it led us to the view that what was important was identifying and mapping what we termed pathways into and pathways out of loneliness. And services can do that by talking with individuals and communities about loneliness. And as Christina made the point, it's about talking about loneliness, not avoiding talking about loneliness, through what's been referred to as guided conversations to generate narratives so that we better understand the connection between life events, personal experiences, and the interpersonal relationships people have or don't have. And to combine, this is services I'm talking about, different strategies they have for identifying and responding to loneliness in a local population. In other words, which services are reaching the most lonely and where there are gaps between services and people. In terms of the top priority for research, it's to improve our understanding of how intrinsic and extrinsic factors, which I think are detailed or outlined in the handout that you've had of our summary, how they interact to generate what we're referring to as pathways into and pathways out of loneliness. And that research can be done, I think, by using a social identity approach. I think that's something that hasn't really been developed very much in the research that we've heard about so far, to help us understand loneliness and to identify both the connections between, but also the distinctiveness of loneliness and social isolation. And the second thing I think that we would recommend research develops are more realist evaluations of multi-site, complex and different interventions and service systems. And that those should include both individual case studies, so we understand more about people's individual experience, but also ethnographic studies of neighbourhoods, so we understand how local neighbourhoods either engage with or isolate people who experience loneliness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Going to go straight to Anna. We'll give more applause at the end, so straight to Anna, I think. And you've got time.
I do, yes. Thank you. I actually am going to change mine based on all the presentations we've heard today, which might be cheating. My first the thought I had when I was thinking about what research would I like to see, what would help me do my job better. And kind of what I came to with that is we talk an awful lot at the campaign about what works, how to alleviate people who are feeling loneliness all or most of the time, how to measure impact of services and so on. But one group, and admittedly they're a very hard group to identify, are people who experience, a group that's overlooked, are people who experience loneliness sometimes. So we've already talked about this today, about how loneliness fluctuates, it's fluid. You can move in and out of it daily, weekly, monthly. Maybe it's about the time of year that can have an influence on how you feel. And I think I would like to see a bit more research into what is the experience of feeling loneliness sometimes, and what protects or what can make it worse. So what could happen in somebody's life that can take them from feeling loneliness occasionally to feeling loneliness all or most of the time. My policy and practice is technically the one on the slide behind me. I mean, this was cheating in the first place because if you count the different elements of this diagram, there's actually 16 things rather than one. But this comes from a report, and there are copies outside that we produced with Age UK called the Promising Approaches to Reducing Loneliness and Isolation in Later Life. And what we're trying to convey in this report, and kind of the point I'd like to make now, is that services and commissioners, neighbours, family, friends, older people need to think a little bit more about the wider environment in which they live and work, and we've heard about this already today. This is something perhaps that we don't always think about, is how one particular service or support fits in within a wider system of things that are enabling us to make and maintain connections and friendships.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think it's David next, and then Ruth on the order, but we've got Ruth's slides. So let's go with David first, and then following the order I've got.
I think for me it's just this practical level of trying to demonstrate to very local level funders what's the value of investing in actions to tackle loneliness and indeed related issues. Now, whether you do or do not believe there's a link to dementia is one thing, but nonetheless, loneliness itself may be a risk factor for poor physical health issues. It has other impacts on the local economy. If you're lonely, you may not be spending your money, you may not be interacting in that way, and that actually has a benefit as well of addressing that. So to me, it's about trying to work out simple, realistic ways of trying to both monitor the kinds of services and supports that are actually happening in local areas. So not only mapping risk factors and pathways for loneliness, but actually mapping the actual experience of what actually is being delivered, what difference it makes, who's actually using those services, who's not using them, and why, and try to build up that kind of evidence. And then, and I've been thinking aloud about this, or thinking not aloud, thinking in my head about this, for academics, when we're preparing proposals for research, at least for sometimes we can get something called the Research Design Service. And there are people there who are paid, basically, to give advice on how to design research in a way that's more likely to be funded, more likely to be useful. And I wonder if something similar could be done for much more local scale evaluation, some kind of centralised body or support. Well, maybe if there used to be. Well, maybe it's been cut.
Yes.
But that kind of thing, because it's the challenge. I think the lady at the back was saying, well, you know, you do the study and it's not clinically significant or not statistically significant, so therefore it's not worth doing. Well, that in itself, of course, is an artefact of the size of the study, but maybe there are ways around that through different, through a more realistic or more feasible form of evaluation, including, by the way, I think the concept of this, not everyone may be familiar with realistic evaluation as a concept, but it's about thinking about things like why people believe an intervention is actually going to work in a specific context, and then trying to understand why it does or it doesn't work. And that kind of meshing of different qualitative and quantitative evaluation methods may be useful. So it's about simple monitoring and collecting data locally that can be used to build up a case. But also I wonder if there's a way of getting some support, you know, this kind of the Research Design Service equivalent for local evaluation.
Yeah, no, I agree. That would be great.
Okay, thank you, David. Then I've got Ruth Rose, who's from the South East England Forum. Adrian,
can I have that?
You have that
On screen?
Ruth.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Ruth Rose. I'm nearly 82, 3 weeks to go.
Oh.
So I'm there and I see it. And my friends are dying around me. And I have to make sure that I'm not going to be lonely. Other people like me are not going to be lonely. And you have got to start right now by not being lonely and isolated. Now, this is a chart I had published last year in The Guardian. And this is actually, as you approach your retirement, you should be looking at, because 30% of women who are now 60 will reach 100 in 2055. Now think about that. You've got a long time out there. So, here we start on the green bit. The first thing you've got to do is look after your body. Look after your mind. Nutrition, everything. It's got to be right so you survive well. The next thing is work at friendships. Don't just expect them to happen. Third thing is, give something back to your community. Get out there. Help. That engages you, gets your mind working, gets your body working, gives you a purpose in life. And the next one is keep doing something new, something to amaze yourself. It's amazing what you really can do and get away with, especially when you're old. And the last and most important thing embraces all of those things. It's appreciate the world you live in. Smell the bluebells, or whatever they're supposed to be like. The point really is that you can't just sit alone and be lonely all for that 40-odd years of your life that's ahead of you when you get to retirement. So you'd better start getting in practice now. And you're all going to get old, except a few of you unfortunate ones.
Yes.
So I've got a few cards like that printed, so you can have some if somebody really wants them. But it'll probably be on the website anyway for this. Now, I want to tell you about something. I meet older people, I meet lonely people. The real lonely people are the people you never meet, you can't get hold of, you can't interview. They are really alone. And mainly because they're bastards.
Yes.
They've been bastards all their lives. What's going to change them now? You know, they're not little old ladies sitting by the fire. They're people shaking the fence at the person next door saying, "Shut up that dog." And that's the sort of thing that you've got to face if you've got to do social work. They're unpleasant people around, and you've got to do the social work with them. Now, I have a lot of praise quickly for the Better Together programme. It's going out through lots of counties around the country, and it's going to concentrate on people who are in a small local area who know everybody, and that's going to be a great, great advantage. The Wayfinders have been going now for about 8 years, and they're exceptional. And it really is a very good programme in East Dorset. Right, now let's get on to our research programme. That's about older people who can no longer be drivers.
Yeah.
Now, there was an anecdote came up, a lovely story came up earlier this week about a lady who had polio from birth, and her husband got dementia, couldn't go on driving. She couldn't tell her husband what to do to keep her out of a wheelchair, move her around in a wheelchair. They got totally isolated overnight when he couldn't drive.
Yeah.
So here we are. Who can stop older people driving? There's doctors, insurers, blue badge, assessors, police, courts, car hirers, self and family. How do they achieve it? What criteria do they use? Are these criteria used just for older people or for everybody? Because there's a lot of bias out there against older people driving. And do they take into account limitations such as living in a rural, isolated area and things like that? They don't, obviously. And is there going to be a bias against motorcycle drivers in their older age? I drive a motorcycle quite often. If an older driver is priced out by insurers, is there going to be an appeal for them? What alternatives might come up instead of having people driving around? Would electric cars be acceptable to older people, to insurers, to all the various police and people like that? A special sort of electric car, maybe? These are questions for research. We need someone to research this turning point in people's lives when somebody takes away their driving license. And it's got to be done in such a way that it can show no bias, no age bias, no skills bias, or anything like that. It's got to show what the real picture is and how it can be overcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, shameless bit of advertising for Brunel. We are actually doing research on older drivers, so I can put you in touch with people who are doing it. And of course, this won't be an issue when we have driverless cars. We just kind of get in it and it will take us wherever we want to go, apparently. I guess I'll have two research questions because we've already established I know nothing about the real world. I'm going to say what I said originally. that in the hope that if I keep saying it often enough, somebody will just give me some money to go away and do it, and then they'll shut me up. Which is, I do think there is an agenda about what protects people from becoming lonely. If we knew what it was that stopped people becoming lonely, maybe we could develop, or we could market it, or sell it, or to put it into an intervention. So that would still be number one, and I think number two would be picking up a point that Ness raised, that we have quite a lot of research with older people generally, but there are whole populations that are excluded from these studies or where we have very limited evidence. So these are people who live in care homes, people potentially in prisons, but I think we don't know too much about carers and certainly groups of ethnic minorities and migrants to the UK. So I think whilst we do have a lot of data, and it may seem that doing more research is just keeping people like me employed, I think there are whole populations that are excluded from our current evidence base, and their needs may or may not be different. But unless we find out, then we risk perpetrating the generation of the kinds of interventions that are not really suitable for those at-risk groups. So those are my two.
Okay, that was really great from the panel, and some not much overlap at all, which is good.
Yeah.
So we'll throw one to you. You might have comments, have questions for these people here. You might have comments, you might have your own suggestions for priorities for policy or practice or research. So please, over to you. Okay, microphones lost. Okay, so down at the front, you start at the front and we'll work back on this side, and we'll start at the back and work down. It's very complicated, so I think here. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Brunel. Just a lot of the speakers today really carefully distinguish between this subjective experience of loneliness and objective social isolation, and stress the points that they're not the same thing, and both might be important for a sort of range of other areas of life. I suppose what I heard less clearly from today was just about how that distinction should inform the development of interventions that can help people. And in the fullness of time, should we be looking for there to be two sort of separate sets of interventions, one which can alleviate loneliness and one which can reduce social isolation, or do the same things actually help with both, and that distinction matters less.
Okay, I'm not going to get the panel to respond in a minute, so we'll build up. I think what I want the panel to do is listen to the comments, and they want to respond to certain things as we go along. So, okay, one here, and then we'll go to the one here.
Sorry, very briefly. I was going to go on a bit of a negative one, but you slightly redeemed there at the end about the ethnic minorities or whatever. So I'd just like to put on that maybe a good start would be to have someone on the panel.
Yeah. Fair point. Okay.
Hi, I'm Ursula Humphreys. I'm a public health manager in Tameside Council in Greater Manchester. Really, my thing is that I'm really interested in the nature of effectiveness in demonstrating the value of prevention, and also in the nature of outcomes. And as one of these policymakers, I sometimes have quite a low voice amongst colleagues in seeking to try and advocate for investing in work that doesn't necessarily provide us with the outcomes that we as local authority commissioners or local people in the local decision makers in the local health economy would see as valid in terms of having a health outcome. And it's that whole bit around quality of life outcome, assessing quality of life measures, and also in terms of those very personalised subjective notions of what is valuable for the people that we're seeking to serve. That sometimes seems to be, at some level, the morality of what we're doing should be guiding us. And I just wonder if there's anything in terms of the research that everybody's doing or has planned that is looking at in terms of informing commissioning decisions from that premise and supporting those of us who want to do that.
Okay.
Sorry, that was long-winded.
No,
that's not fine.
Sorry.
Okay, so one here, and who's next on this one? So we've got a couple down the front here. So one here.
My question was probably aimed at David. For the singing, you were talking about qualities. Are there any other social isolation and loneliness interventions which look at qualities?
Okay, store it up.
I have to challenge Ruth's model here on board. It's a very dangerous thing to suggest that loneliness is an individually is the fault of the individual, and by doing these things, they will not be lonely. Because someone who's childless, who's very old, whose friends have all died, who lives in a remote rural area, whatever they've done throughout their life isn't going to help in terms of loneliness. Nor is someone who's caring for someone 24/7, someone who's got dementia, who isn't able to go out into the community because it's not been designed for people with dementia. So there are structures that mean people live in disadvantaged areas. There are structures that mean people haven't got enough material resources to go out and do the things you suggest there. And there are structures that mean we aren't a dementia-friendly community or cities.
My message was to start now with this, and it will help you later on.
So let's come back to this. Yeah. Okay, so, Norma.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a question really for Professor Victor. I'm very struck by a comment you made earlier on today about why is it research always focuses on what I always understood to be pathology rather than normal human activity. And if we really want to understand whether we take a model on the board, the individual or the community-based or whatever, wherever you pitch yourself, why don't you start, for example, or some people here, looking at what it is, that's 90% you said, the people who don't feel lonely in this country. Why don't we start there, looking at them and understanding what it is that makes them not feel lonely, so perhaps we can identify some things that public health departments, I don't know, local authorities could actually start to introduce maybe at community level as well as individual level, because if it's working for 90% of the people, some of it has to be good, doesn't it? And maybe some of it can be terrible. That's my question.
Okay, so maybe here, and then go back to the PhD student from York. So anyway, yeah.
Although I happen to be
in
Ruth's camp, age, it really is a manner. And what I want to know is, why aren't we addressing this right from the start? Because children are often lonely, and they find social life very difficult, a lot of them. And if we could try to explain to them that isolation, that loneliness, and give them tactics to overcome, I think that could be a worthwhile research.
Okay. Okay, so there. And then after that, go back here.
At the very start of this, Laura introduced the day by talking about people who are chronically lonely. I think she mentioned it several times. I've just wondered what other researchers felt the data out there could show us. We've been insisting on sort of longitudinal designs, but I might want to challenge, for example, ELSA's great, but data are collected every 2 years, and we might want to say that that's maybe or maybe not a pertinent time frame for what might happen between these 2 years in terms of whether people's loneliness or social isolation levels have changed. And I know there was a mention there of looking at pathways, and maybe we need qualitative data, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Do we need to measure, using scales quantitatively on a more frequent, regular basis, so we don't know more about trajectories and things?
Okay, thank you. And then one point at the back, and then we're going to go 1, 2, and then we're going to go to the panel.
Paul Can, HEK, Oxfordshire. Just 2 quick things. First of all, a note of caution, could I, about the word and the underlying thinking behind the word intervention, which slightly implies that you zoom in on somebody, sort them out as if they were in an isolated context, and then it'll all be fixed. Whereas actually the campaign's latest report shows the model which Anna flashed up, which is a very complex system, and we need to grapple with that process of all the different ingredients, transport, technology, communities, and researchers surely need to find a way of assessing the extent to which those whole systems are changing. And my second point is a very exciting presentation today about what you describe as non-health aspects. I think it's hugely important, and for our part, through the Age of Creativity, we're promoting things like singing and health, and we have to make the evidence very strong if we're going to shift commissioners out of a kind of survival mode in that. But I'm absolutely right behind you on that. But please could the academic community generally make sure there is balance and a measured approach in assessing the difference between traditional and non-traditional. I mean, actually, a lot of older people we deal with do rather like going out to a lunch club, sitting down and doing something very straightforward, and they get a lot of comfort and support out of that. And I hope the academic community will make sure that this debate is balanced, and particularly informing commissioners.
Okay, great. So one. Okay. Can you just be very quick with your comments now? I've got 4 people, and then we'll go quickly to those 4. So, yeah.
I'm Michael Stewart from CBS Brent. I'm 4 days into a job, the remit of tackling social isolation in Brent. What I'd most like to see, I mentioned to a couple of people already, is a way to peer-to-peer contact people doing the same jobs as me but slightly longer. So that if I've got a question, I can just send out an email, reach 100 people, and I can get feedback coming back to me, oh, we did this, I did that, this worked for me, that kind of peer-to-peer support.
Okay, great. Who's got a mic? Yeah.
I do. My name is Christina. I work for a company called Coblink. So we work with commissioners and both local authorities and CCGs. And I think my interest is more from a practical level. It's been mentioned a couple of times around outcomes. So we're looking to help commissioners centre their services around the outcomes that patients want and need, rather than those that we presume that they need. So I think just an important point to make is that you have to ask them and you have to engage with them, and it's something that I think more CCGs are trying to do, but it has to be done as routine and as the norm, rather than just on their discretion.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Lucy. I'm from the Friendship Network in Islington. Just another note on language and concepts. It was important that Christina said that loneliness is a part of human experience, and that, in small doses it may have benefits. So I just wonder about the name of the campaign and whether, say, action on loneliness, because we can't try to end it. It's
That's good.
And then final point.
Hi, my name is Karen James and I work for a mental health research charity called the McDaid Foundation. I just wanted to reflect that actually there's a lot of researchers that aren't in fact in academia and that do work in the voluntary sector and that are really interested in looking at alternative methods of evaluation, such as realistic evaluation. And I also wanted to ask the panel, we've been doing some work in West London where we've been developing some new model of care to reduce social isolation amongst people with long-term mental health problems. And I was just wondering, kind of thinking about some of these models of reducing loneliness, whether the work that's done is really just about getting people out and accessing these community resources and joining groups, or whether there's more in-depth work with people around thinking about some of the barriers, personal barriers that they may have. There's some mention of certain personality traits, for want of a better term, and also maybe things to do with people's individuals' life experiences as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Lots of really good points and questions. We can't address all of them. What I'm asked to do, perhaps the panelists go in the same order they presented, if that's all right. If Adrian doesn't mind. You've got 1 minute each, if you don't mind. So whatever points you want to reflect on from the things that have been said, please do, Jimmy. So, Adrian.
Okay, thank you. The points I'd like to pick up on is firstly this distinction between loneliness and social isolation. I don't think one can just separate the two out entirely, but I think we do have to recognise their distinctiveness in the sense that loneliness is the experience that people are having, it's the feeling they have, and I think we do need to understand why some people experience that differentially from others, and why some people are in a position where they can take up opportunities for social participation that are out there, and some people find that very difficult. And unless we can differentiate between those groups, then I don't think we're always going to reach the most lonely. I think the second point, really relates to the last point that was made. That's probably because perhaps I can only remember that one after all else. But certainly, I think there is a real case for local, district, neighbourhood, whatever, community-based research and evaluation and development. And I think there's a real opportunity for researchers, whether they're working within a university or whether they're out there doing the work, working with people who are trying to develop responses to loneliness. And I think if we can identify in those kinds of settings why some people are finding it difficult to overcome the experience of loneliness they're having and work with them productively, then that is perhaps as useful as large studies that make generalised statements about people who are lonely.
Thank you very much. Great.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I think
I'll do my best to do this in a minute. First one to Michael about peer-to-peer support. Massive plug for our learning network. We have over 750 organisations across the United Kingdom who are part of this network. It's both online and offline. We hold regular events, not unlike these, sometimes with a bit more of a kind of interactive element to it. And really we understand the need, particularly for small community organisations, to get together to kind of share both what's working but also what's not working. We don't talk about failure enough, actually. And I'd like to talk a lot more about what goes wrong. So do join the Learning Network. Second one, I've heard so many fantastic examples across the whole day from the audience, and I guess this is a plea to everyone who's spoken about their service to email me. If you could just let me know if there's any reports, websites, case studies, anything. I would love to push it back out to our learning network to make sure that we're really sharing both academic and practical evidence in this field. The point about the name, I'm afraid I can't remember who asked me this question. Hello. It's a very fair point. I think the campaign was originally, there was a lot of debates before my time about whether it should be a positive name, something about connections in older age, or whether it should be something more hard-hitting. I think Campaign to End Loneliness was picked mainly because it's quite distinctive, it's quite aspirational, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can end loneliness. So I appreciate you calling us up on that one. And then equally also about ages. Who asked about all ages? Oh, hello. So the campaign was originally set up because of a recognition that older people are perhaps more vulnerable to experiencing loneliness because all these different risk factors and triggers that can happen to us at any point in our lives are more likely to combine as we age. So, for example, kind of bereavement, loss of health, stopping work. Obviously, these things can happen no matter what our age, but they might be more likely to combine and might make it a more complex experience. However, there is it's a fast-growing area looking at loneliness across all age groups. So just today, the Big Lunch have published a really interesting piece of research that looks at loneliness from 18 and above. And equally, there are lots of other charities that are picking up loneliness. So people like Get Connected, they're particularly for youth, 16 to 24. But other ones like Macmillan, who are looking at supporting people with cancer, which we heard about earlier today. So whilst we might only be looking at older age, there really are a growing number of people going beyond that. And I think that's probably all the time I have.
Okay. David?
Yeah, I think there's a programme on Channel 4, I think, called Gogglebox, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I mention that is that's a way of regularly collecting information from people on a weekly basis. And I don't think it's beyond the wit of people in the UK now using new technologies like phones to actually for people to record information how they feel on a regular basis. And that's probably not that expensive to do. But I don't know much about the technology, but it's a way to think about things. Can we use digital technology that we all have, mobile phones, etc., more of us will have, to actually collect that kind of longitudinal data that was asked for? I also had the point right at the back from the chap from Oxford. It was Oxford, wasn't it? Paul McCann, sorry. Lots of names to remember. Absolutely take your point about intervention, but also take the point that sometimes you have to use the language that's most appropriate to the audience you're trying to convince to give you money. And there will be some people who prefer the term intervention to more what you might consider more appropriate terms. I do agree absolutely, though, that it's about systems rather than specific individual things. In public health, it is about doing more than one thing and not just one thing alone. I think in your point about the lunch clubs, and that's me saying that, I think the point I was trying to make is not so much that lunch clubs are a bad thing or an inappropriate thing, it's that there were some areas that I looked at where there was very little choice other than lunch clubs. And it's that kind of issue. And it reminds me of some work that I think one of Christina's colleagues at Brunel, Peter Beresford, has been doing on shaping the lives of older people or something like that, where he was emphasising, or the report was emphasising, the importance of, well, it sounds obvious, engaging with older people to help determine what's actually provided. So actually doing a bit more of that. And my final quick point is to the point about QALYs. The answer in terms of promotion prevention, actually not that much. It tends to be specific measures, the loneliness scales and those kinds of things. And that's also a challenge because when you're trying to compare an investment to tackle loneliness against hip replacement or whatever, then there's a challenge there. So thinking about appropriate outcome measures and translating between outcome measures is another important issue.
Okay, thank you, David. Ruth?
Yeah. Christina, thanks for having a go at me. I absolutely agree with you. There are circumstances that hit them so hard that they've got no options. And I'm just hoping that those who don't actually have that happen to them can survive better. But it's quite true. In East Sussex alone, in 2 hospitals, we have 1,800 elderly falls resulting in broken hips every year. That's 6 operations a day in 2 hospitals, and each of those costs between £9,000 and £10,000, never mind the social cost. If that sort of thing hits somebody in your family, you know about it, and you know how isolation and loneliness can hit them so hard when an accident happens, and it takes a year out of their life. And sometimes all is lost by the end of that year. So that's a very true thing. Ethnic minorities, we've lost him now. There he is. No, he's gone. There's some very good projects with HIV positive people, especially in London, inner London, and that with a lot of other minority groups, it's all about getting more permanent housing for people as they approach their old age with difficulties like this. And it's a very important bit. It's all about housing. And let's get one or two here. A Better Together project is going to normalise around a lot of counties, and that is going to bring isolation and loneliness to the attention of local people working actually in the community. It's a new project and it's going to spread around the country, and it's an excellent piece of work, but it's going to be hard work for the local authorities.
Last point.
Children. Last little one on children. Yes. You and I probably have been through the period of the wartime where not only did we experience loneliness through being evacuees, we experienced hunger and all these things, and you've got to experience it a bit to understand it. You've actually got to feel that you have nowhere to turn, nowhere at all to turn in these circumstances. And when you've had that feeling, I think you'll understand better how you can approach somebody who is hiding the feeling but got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll thank you. I didn't plant the person in the audience who asked about why nobody wanted to fund the positive sort of aspect of loneliness research, if you like. But I think it just reflects the fact that inevitably in research, because particularly policy-driven research, people are much more interested in researching a problem or what they conceptualise as a problem. So, but I think, and I'm just going to carry on saying it until somebody funds me, and then I'll go away and do it. But I think it is important to look at the reverse of that. And I guess the other couple of points I wanted to make, I think it is a fair point to say if we do studies like ELSA, we only measure loneliness every 2 years, and we know loneliness can vary over the course of a day, over the course of a week, And I'm sure that, in fact, I have an application in, which if any of my friends in the audience are reviewing, please look nicely upon, to actually use new technology to have kind of 24-hour recording of loneliness. But at Brunel, we tried just measuring loneliness every quarter, every 3 months, to a small select group of volunteers, because I wanted to just look at this perception that loneliness is worse at Christmas than it is at other points of the year. And the result of that particular project was that we single-handedly have bankrupted every age charity in Britain by demonstrating that actually the biggest increase reported in loneliness was in the summer months, not in the winter months. So people are interested in short-term, trying to look at short-term changes over much more limited time periods to try and understand the experience, and perhaps where the normal becomes slightly less normal. So I think that's my minute of fame. Thank you.
So let's first of all thank the 5 panellists. Something on behalf of the campaign to finish the day, and then I'll just thank you genuinely.
This is off the top of my head, so I'll try not to ramble. Thank you very much, everybody who attended. I'd like to say a really big thank you actually to Angie, who may be hiding. Stand up, Angie. Everyone applaud Angie, who organised this whole event. Angie also battled fire and various other mishaps along the way. Maybe not directly. So I suppose what I'd just like to say is a big thank you as well to the School of Social Care Research for bringing everyone together, particularly the 6 presenters who all gave really insightful, really engaging presentations. I certainly have made reams of notes to take away. And thank you again to everyone for attending, for commenting, for challenging. If you want to carry on doing that, do come to us either at the School of Social Care Research or at the Campaign to End Loneliness. I'm sure we'll be happy to talk further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then just final comments from me. So I want to say thank you as well to Anna, of course, on the campaign for coordinating with us, collaborating with us in this event. Thank you to you for coming. It's been great. We were pleased. We were very pleased when we had to move to a bigger room. We weren't very pleased we got a bigger room then wasn't available. But thank you for soldiering on through the day. I just want to repeat that the slides will be on the website. There'll be a video on the website. We haven't had a video website before with the word bastards, but the event works actually. So that'll be there, warts and all, for you to catch up on today. Please do email people. Most of the speakers I had to shut up, or Laura had to stop before they got to the end. And loads of things to share with you, so I'm sure they'll be delighted to give you more information if you wanted. To say we're not quite sure what we will in School of Social Research. Our focus is on social care. There's lots of things. Christina mentioned the SRC seminar that she's running in Brunel. Anna's mentioned that we've got 2 events. So these discussions continue, of course, through those means and lots of other means. In the School of Social Care Research, I'm sure we'll come back to this topic as well, think about it through a social care lens, because it is just such an important issue. And then finally to say that if you can cope with finding your way back up to the Shaw Library, there's tea and cake and lasagna and red wine. Chocolate? Maybe chocolate, I doubt it. Maybe chocolate cake. Angie, do you want to say something?
Can I just make a plug too? So if you do have research ideas, the School of Social Care Research has a research call for proposals open at the moment. It's on our website, closes on the 27th of May. We've got 2 million available to fund projects and up to 1 million paying in 1 project. So we've got some great ideas, and we kind of maybe don't all get together and do 1 proposal, but if you have ideas and you want to share them, tell them, come up with some great.
Right, on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much for coming. Safe journey, but please do, once you're paid, please